Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time we're looking into something pretty common, I guess you could say,
Hmm.
cohabitation before marriage. Moving in together before actually tying the knot.
Right.
It seems like everybody's doing it these days.
Yeah.
Nearly 70% of couples in the U.S. are choosing to live together before marriage.
Wow.
But the big question we're going to try to tackle is,
Yeah.
how do different religions view this practice?
Well, you've hit on a big one. I mean,
Mm.
you have these modern trends in relationships
Yeah.
bumping up against these, long-held religious beliefs.
Right.
So I think looking at these different views can give us a really interesting perspective on the whole debate.
For sure. So where should we start?
Well, how about Christianity?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, a lot of the arguments against cohabitation seem to come from the Bible's stance on
Yeah.
sex outside of marriage.
Right, exactly. So like that whole thou shalt not thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Many Christian denominations point to passages like Hebrews 13:4. It says, "Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled."
Oh,
And they interpret that to mean that sexual intimacy should be reserved for marriage.
mm-hmm.
So for them living together and engaging in that kind of activity
Yeah.
before marriage goes against that fundamental principle.
So it's not just about sharing an address.
Right.
It's about the, implied sexual relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a really important distinction.
Yep. And then there's also that whole concept of marriage as a sacred covenant.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Like in a lot of Protestant denominations,
Mhm.
marriage is seen as a reflection of Christ's relationship with the church.
Right.
This holy union ordained by God.
This is a big deal.
So living together without that formal, God-sanctioned commitment
Yeah,
can be seen as like disrespectful
absolutely.
for the sanctity of marriage.
Yeah, it's seen as undermining that sacred institution.
And what about for Catholics?
Oh, yeah.
They have that extra layer with marriage as a sacrament.
That's right. For Catholics, sacraments are outward signs of inward grace instituted by Christ himself.
Okay.
So marriage isn't just a legal contract or a social custom.
Yeah.
It's a sacred ritual that brings God's grace
Hmm.
upon the couple.
Okay, so by living together without that sacramental bond,
Right.
you're basically kind of saying that that doesn't matter.
In a sense, yeah. For them, cohabitation risks trivializing
Mm-hmm.
the spiritual significance
Yeah.
and the holiness that the church ascribes to marriage.
So it's almost like reducing this divinely ordained union to something like casual or less meaningful.
That's a key distinction.
Yeah.
It goes against their core beliefs.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I've got a pretty good picture of the Christian viewpoint.
Yeah, I think so.
What about Judaism?
Okay, so with Judaism, it's a bit more nuanced.
Yeah.
They don't have like a specific outright ban on cohabitation
Right.
like you'd find in the Torah.
Okay, but I've heard that Jewish law discourages it.
Yeah, generally speaking, that's true.
Is that because of the emphasis on marriage as a sacred act?
It's more about maintaining the traditions and sanctity surrounding marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Jewish law, which is also known as halakha,
Okay.
emphasizes the importance of a formal marriage process,
Okay.
including a ceremony,
Yeah.
specific rituals,
Mm.
to establish a couple
Yeah.
as husband and wife in the eyes of God and the community.
So living together as if married without that formal process
Oh,
is
yeah.
kind of like,
It's seen as undermining those
Okay.
traditions.
yeah.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
less about like condemning living together
Right.
and more about upholding the rituals
Exactly.
and procedures that define marriage.
That's a good way to put it. And you also have to remember that Judaism itself is very diverse.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You have various branches,
Right.
like Orthodox, conservative,
Yeah,
and Reform,
right.
and they all have varying levels of strictness
Okay.
in how they interpret and apply Jewish law.
So some are more accepting of cohabitation than others? Exactly.
Yeah.
Some of the more liberal denominations may be more accepting,
Okay.
especially if the couple is committed and plans to marry eventually.
So there's room for individual interpretation,
Absolutely.
even within the same faith.
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating.
Yeah.
It shows how these beliefs can evolve and adapt.
Okay, that's super interesting. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about Islam.
Okay, sounds good.
Now, from what I understand, the Islamic perspective on premarital cohabitation is pretty straightforward.
It is. It's strictly prohibited in Islam.
Okay, and that's because...
Well, the Quran explicitly says that sexual relations should only happen within the bounds of marriage.
Okay, is there like a specific verse that addresses this?
There is, yeah. Surah Al-Isra 17.32.
Okay.
It says, "And do not approach unlawful sexual intercourse. Indeed, it is ever in immorality and is evil as a way."
So that's pretty clear.
It is. This verse, along with others, make it very clear
Mm-hmm.
that marriage is the only acceptable context for sexual intimacy in Islam.
And cohabitation pretty much implies a sexual relationship, right?
Right, and that's why it's considered a violation of this principle.
So there's no ambiguity there?
Not really.
Hmm.
For Muslims, it's a transgression, a
Mm-hmm.
clear violation of Islamic law.
Okay, so we've talked about Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Yeah,
And it seems like they all have pretty clear stances on this.
they do.
But I think we should move beyond just like the scriptural arguments
Yeah.
and look at some of the moral and ethical concerns
Okay.
that often come up in discussions about cohabitation. A lot of religious critics seem to worry about the impact cohabitation can have on marriage itself.
Yeah, there's a concern that cohabitation promotes this trial marriage mentality,
Okay.
and that could devalue marriage as a lifelong commitment.
So instead of seeing marriage as this like sacred, enduring bond,
Right.
it becomes more like a test run.
Exactly.
And you can just opt out if it doesn't work out.
Which goes against the core values of many religions,
Mm-hmm.
where marriage is a covenant,
Right.
a sacred promise made before God.
Yeah. Okay. And this trial marriage mentality seems to connect with the argument that cohabitation can lead to less ethical foundations in a relationship.
You see that a lot in these discussions.
Yeah. Okay.
The idea that when you remove the commitment of marriage,
Yeah.
it can lead to a more casual approach to the relationship.
So it's like, why bother working through tough times
Yeah.
or investing so much if we're not fully committed?
Yeah, exactly. There's this fear that cohabitation promotes a sense of disposability
Okay.
in relationships.
So basically that goes against commitment and responsibility.
Right, which are values that many religions uphold.
And then there's the argument about the impact on society as a whole.
Right, the idea that widespread cohabitation
Yeah.
leads to a decline in traditional family values
Mhm.
and undermines the stability of communities.
So it becomes less about the individual couples
Yeah.
and more about the impact on society.
Exactly. This is a big talking point for social conservatives,
Mm-hmm.
both religious and secular.
Yeah.
They argue that strong families
Yeah.
are the foundation of a healthy society,
Okay.
and anything that weakens those families weakens the social fabric.
So cohabitation leads to a devaluation of marriage.
Right.
And that has these negative consequences.
Yeah, potentially for how we raise children,
Mm-hmm.
care for the elderly,
Yeah.
even maintain social order.
Wow. Okay, so we've heard a lot about how cohabitation might undermine traditional values.
Mhm.
But it's also important to acknowledge that not everyone agrees with this.
Right.
Plenty of people argue that judging a relationship solely based on living arrangements is outdated.
Yeah.
And misses the point.
It's a good point.
Yeah,
It's crucial to look at the counterarguments.
right. A lot of people would say the real measure of a relationship
Mm-hmm.
is the love,
Yeah.
the respect,
Mhm.
and the commitment between partners,
Right.
regardless of whether they live together before marriage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They say that focusing only on living arrangements ignores the substance of the relationship.
Right, like the emotional connection,
Exactly.
shared values,
Yeah.
mutual support.
All of that.
So maybe instead of getting hung up on whether or not a couple lives together,
Yeah.
we should be asking, are they treating each other with respect?
Mm.
Are they building a life together?
Right. It's about the quality of the relationship, not just the living situation.
And it makes you wonder, does cohabitation actually harm relationships?
It's a good question.
Or is it just people trying to hold on to old traditions?
That's a question a lot of couples are wrestling with.
Yeah, especially those trying to balance their own choices
Mhm.
with their religious beliefs.
That's right.
This issue seems to have a lot of nuance to it.
Absolutely. There are a lot of gray areas.
Yeah, and we need to unpack all of that.
We do. There are no simple answers here.
For sure. Reducing it to black and white doesn't really capture the complexity
Nope, not at all.
of modern relationships.
Definitely not. You know, it's interesting to see, even within these religious communities,
Yeah.
there's a growing conversation
Mm.
about how to kind of reconcile these traditional teachings with the realities of how people are living today.
Right, because people still care about
Yeah.
love and respect and commitment,
Yeah,
but maybe it doesn't have to look exactly the same way it used to.
exactly. Yeah, some progressive theologians, even in like the more traditional denominations,
Okay.
are starting to emphasize the quality of the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
like the love, the respect, the shared values,
Okay.
rather than just focusing on did they or didn't they live together before marriage?
So it's less about like cohabitation as a sin
Right.
and more about like,
Oh.
are these two people building a life together?
Yeah, are they treating each other well?
Right, exactly.
And I think this shift is happening because
Yeah.
societal norms have changed so much.
They really have, even in the last few decades.
Yeah, cohabitation is just so much more normalized.
Right. It's not this taboo thing anymore.
Especially for younger generations.
Right. It's like almost expected.
Almost, yeah.
So that puts religious institutions in a tough spot.
Yeah.
Trying to hold on to these centuries-old traditions when the world is changing so fast.
Yeah, it's a balancing act for them. They want to be true to their faith.
Yeah.
But they also need to connect with people who are living in a very different world.
Right. It makes you wonder if these religious views on cohabitation can even change?
It does.
Or are some of these principles just set in stone?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I mean, some people would say that certain core beliefs,
Yeah.
like the sanctity of marriage as a divine institution, can't change.
Right.
But even within those same faiths, you'll find people who say
Okay.
that how we apply those beliefs
Yeah.
has to adapt.
To the changing world.
Right, because the world is not static.
Right.
So maybe it's not about abandoning tradition, but about reinterpreting it.
For the modern world.
Exactly.
And have we seen any patterns in the research
Oh.
about like which groups are more or less open to this?
Well, it's definitely not uniform, but some denominations,
Yeah.
particularly in Protestant Christianity,
Okay.
are having these more open conversations about relationships.
So instead of just shutting down the conversation, they're actually listening.
Yeah, they're recognizing that if they want to connect with younger people, they need to address these topics.
Right, even if it means questioning some long-held beliefs.
Exactly.
This whole debate seems to be making religious communities
Yeah.
think about some really fundamental questions.
It is. It's about the nature of faith.
Yeah.
The role of tradition.
Mm-hmm.
The importance of personal interpretation. It can get pretty heated sometimes.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I think at its core, it's about trying to figure out how to live your faith
Yeah.
in a world that's constantly changing.
And this reminds me of another argument we touched on earlier, the idea that cohabitation leads to this culture of convenience.
Right. Instant gratification.
Yeah, and that could have negative consequences.
Yeah, you hear that a lot
Okay.
from social conservatives,
Yeah.
especially about how it could impact families and communities.
So it's not just about individual choices.
Right.
It's about the big picture.
Yeah. They're worried that if we don't emphasize commitment,
Yeah.
it weakens society as a whole.
Because,
They argue that strong families built on marriage
okay.
are essential for a healthy society.
But couldn't you argue that committed couples who cohabit
Oh, yeah?
can also contribute to a strong society?
Sure.
I mean, does a marriage license automatically equal a healthy family?
That's a great point, and that's a key part of the counterargument.
Okay.
A lot of people would say that you can't judge a relationship or a family just based on whether they're married.
Okay.
There are tons of cohabiting couples who are totally committed,
Yeah.
raising kids responsibly,
Right.
and contributing to their communities.
So maybe it's not about the legal status.
Right.
It's about the values
Yeah, exactly.
that the relationship is built on.
And, a lot of people who cohabit do it for practical reasons,
Okay, like what?
like finances
Oh, yeah.
or wanting to make sure they're really compatible
Yeah.
before making such a big commitment
Right, so it's not necessarily about rejecting tradition. It's
Right.
about finding a different path.
to a strong relationship.
And a lot of these couples do plan to get married eventually.
They do.
They see living together as like a step
Yeah.
in the process.
It's a way to make sure they're making the right decision.
So it's almost like a trial marriage,
Yeah, some people see it that way.
but not in a negative way,
Right. It's about strengthening the eventual commitment.
by making sure they really know each other.
Exactly.
Wow. So maybe cohabitation isn't undermining marriage. It's
Mhm.
actually supporting it
Potentially.
in some cases.
It highlights how important it is
Mm-hmm.
to look at each couple individually.
Yeah.
Because what works for one couple
Mm-hmm.
might not work for another.
Right. And assuming that cohabitation is always bad
Yeah,
ignores all those differences.
it does.
This whole conversation has really made me think about
Yeah.
what is the real purpose of marriage?
That is a big question.
Yeah, and I think different religions,
Yeah.
cultures, even individuals might have totally different answers.
Totally.
Is it about a spiritual union?
Yeah.
Is it a legal contract?
It's a social institution.
Yeah, or just a personal commitment.
Yeah. And how do those different interpretations shape how we view cohabitation?
It's complicated.
It really is.
I thought this would be a much more straightforward conversation about
Mhm.
rules and doctrines,
Yeah.
but there's so much nuance.
There is. We've uncovered so many layers.
We have.
Theology,
Yeah.
ethics,
social implications.
changing norms.
It's fascinating.
It really is.
And even seemingly simple questions can be so complex, I think, for anyone struggling with this issue, whether personally
Yeah.
or religiously. Understanding this complexity is so important.
It is.
It's not about judging others. It's about having open and honest conversations
Exactly.
and respecting different perspectives.
Absolutely.
This whole thing about cohabitation, it really makes you think about love and commitment and what marriage even means today.
It really does.
Yeah.
Like, it challenges us to examine our own beliefs
Yeah.
about relationships, families, all of it.
So to wrap things up,
Yeah.
let's leave our listeners with something to think about,
Okay.
given all these different religious viewpoints and how much society is changing.
Right.
How do you think these views on cohabitation will evolve in the future?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah,
It's really hard to predict the future,
right.
but this conversation is definitely not going away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as younger generations grow up
Yeah,
with their own ideas about relationships and family,
right.
and religious institutions are trying to figure out how to stay relevant.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
It is. We might see more denominations becoming more accepting
Okay.
of different kinds of relationships. Or maybe the divide between traditional views and more modern views will grow even wider.
Yeah, who knows?
Exactly.
It's amazing how personal choices and culture and religion all play a part
They do.
in shaping how we see marriage.
It's fascinating.
It really is. Well, this has been a really eye-opening conversation.
It has.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
Of course. It's been a pleasure.
And to everyone listening, we hope this has given you a lot to think about as you navigate your own relationships
Right.
and try to figure out what marriage means in today's world.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.